How did Roman medicine save soldiers on the battlefield? You will be shocked by the methods. The Roman army is considered to be the ideal machine for conquest, where every legionnaire was taught only one thing from childhood: how to fight effectively. But what if I told you that Rome's secret weapon was not the sword, but the scalpel? The Romans were the first in history to understand that an army that knows how to save its soldiers wins more often than one that only knows how to attack. They created a system that was 1,500 years ahead of its time, turning the battlefield not only into a place of combat, but also into a place of amazing rescue. This system was so effective that a wounded Roman legionnaire had a better chance of survival than an ordinary civilian who fell ill in a large city. They made a revolution that is not written about in military history textbooks. Watch the video to the end to learn how the Romans performed complex operations right on the front lines, what tools they used, and why their field hospitals were cleaner and safer than hospitals in 19th century Europe. What I am about to show you will completely and radically change your established view of the structure and organization of the Roman legions and their superiority. The vast majority of modern people traditionally imagine the Roman army as a monolithic, homogeneous mass of identical soldiers in armor, marching in disciplined formation into bloody battle under the eagles of the legions. However, behind every experienced centurion and ordinary legionnaire stood a complex support structure that historians rarely discuss in detail in popular sources. A professional military medical corps with a clear hierarchy and trained personnel. This hidden system was Rome's secret weapon, giving it a huge advantage over its enemies on the battlefield. It was a real revolution in military affairs and the approach to caring for soldiers, which had no analogs. Before the Romans, medical assistance to the wounded directly on the battlefield was purely a matter of chance and luck, completely dependent on the goodwill of comrades in arms or the efforts of the wounded warrior himself, who could bleed to death. The practical Romans methodically turned medical care into a systematic, strictly mandatory, and regulated part of the legion's military machine, as important as the supply of weapons. Every wounded soldier was entitled to qualified medical care, regardless of the severity of their injury or their origin. At the head of this well-thought-out medical system were highly educated medics, medici in Latin, qualified doctors with many years of education, often of Greek origin from the eastern provinces, who possessed extensive theoretical knowledge of anatomy and practical experience. They had privileged officer status in the legion's hierarchy, received high regular salaries comparable to those of centurions, and were personally responsible to the command for the overall health and combat readiness of the entire cohort, or even the entire legion of thousands of men. Their multifaceted task was not only to directly treat wounded and sick soldiers, but also to competently organize the entire medical service, train personnel, and monitor the sanitary condition of the camp. Medics were respected specialists whose opinions were taken into account by commanders when making decisions. One step lower in the hierarchy were the numerous capsarii, named after their characteristic leather first aid bags, called capsa, which they always carried with them, filled with bandages and instruments. They were trained field medics and paramedics, specially trained to provide emergency first aid directly on the battlefield under enemy arrows and spears. They were professionally skilled in quickly stopping dangerous bleeding with tourniquets, competently applying sterile bandages to wounds, and promptly evacuating seriously wounded comrades from the front line to a safe place for further treatment. Capsarians operated in the thick of battle, risking their own lives to save wounded legionnaires. Their medical training and education were strictly standardized according to uniform rules throughout the army. Each capsarius knew exactly what to do and how to help a soldier with a specific type of injury, stab, cut, or arrow wound. This allowed medics to act quickly, confidently, and in a coordinated manner even in the absolute chaos of a fierce battle when every second decided the fate of the wounded. Standardization of procedures saved thousands of lives by eliminating confusion and mistakes due to inexperience. This well-thought-out three-tiered system of care, a qualified doctor for complex operations, a field medic for first aid, and a stationary hospital for recovery, was incredibly effective for its time and ahead of its era. It reliably ensured that every wounded soldier in the Legion would receive qualified medical care as soon as possible after being wounded, maximizing his chances of survival. No other army in the ancient world before the Romans had anything even remotely similar in scale and organization. Among the barbarians, the wounded were most often doomed to death or disability. Experienced Roman commanders quickly realized the enormous economic benefits and strategic advantages of such a medical system for the army. An experienced veteran legionnaire who had been successfully treated and returned to duty after being wounded was incomparably more valuable to the Legion's combat effectiveness than a completely untrained young recruit with no combat experience who required months of training. Military medicine became an effective tool for preserving the most valuable and irreplaceable resource of any army: its trained, experienced personnel with combat experience. Every veteran saved was invaluable, as years and significant funds had already been spent on their training. The very existence of such a developed medical corps significantly raised the overall morale and motivation of the legionnaires before battle. Every soldier knew and was confident that if he was seriously wounded in battle, he would not be left to die in agony on the battlefield. As was the case with the barbarians, he would be taken care of by trained professionals in a relatively safe and clean hospital with the necessary instruments and medicines. This confidence in medical care was psychologically invaluable to soldiers facing mortal danger. This firm confidence in the future and the care of the state made the legionnaires noticeably bolder, more decisive, and more aggressive in hand-to-hand combat with the enemy. They were morally prepared to take greater risks and engage in dangerous tactical maneuvers, knowing full well that behind them stood a powerful, well-oiled system of rescue and recovery. Military medicine quietly became a powerful psychological weapon for Rome, giving it an advantage in the morale of its troops. Soldiers confident in the help available to them fought more fiercely and did not retreat even in critical situations, which often determined the outcome of a battle. Do you think it is fair to consider the creation of professional, organized military medicine one of the main key factors in the incredible success of Roman conquests over the centuries, on a par with the Legion's excellent battle tactics and high-quality weapons? Share your informed opinion in the comments below. Want to know the secret that changed the rules of warfare? This secret is not a new weapon, but a special building that the Romans built in every large military camp. We are talking about the Valetudinarium, the first specialized military hospital in history. Before that, wounded and sick soldiers were housed in tents or ordinary barracks, where they were mixed with healthy soldiers. This led to the rapid spread of disease and low chances of recovery. The Romans realized that effective treatment required an isolated and specially equipped space. Valetudinaria had a standard and carefully thought-out layout. It was usually a rectangular building with an inner courtyard surrounded by a long corridor. Along this corridor were separate wards for patients. This layout was ingenious. The corridor isolated the wards from the external noise and bustle of the camp, creating a peaceful environment for recovery. The inner courtyard provided good ventilation and lighting. Each ward was designed for a small number of soldiers, usually no more than 2 or 3. This prevented overcrowding and reduced the risk of cross-infection. Soldiers with different ailments could be placed in different parts of the hospital. Special attention was paid to hygiene. Valetudinaria were always built near a source of clean running water. They had a sewage system to drain wastewater, which was an incredible innovation for that time. Hospital floors were often made of stone or tile so that they could be easily washed. The walls were covered with smooth plaster that did not accumulate dirt. Roman doctors intuitively understood the connection between cleanliness and health. The hospital contained more than just wards. There were operating rooms, treatment rooms, a kitchen for preparing special dietary meals for patients, and even pharmacy warehouses. It was a veritable health factory. The existence of such hospitals made it possible to perform complex surgical procedures in controlled conditions, rather than in a dirty tent. This greatly increased the chances of a successful outcome. After surgery, soldiers were placed in a clean ward under the supervision of specialists. The Roman army was the only one in the ancient world that systematically built such facilities. The Valetudinarium was as standard an element of a military camp as barracks, headquarters, or warehouses. But what good are hospital walls if doctors don't have the right tools? Ready to find out what Roman surgeons were equipped with and why their toolkit shocks modern historians? What I am about to reveal to you is the most closely guarded and amazing secret of Roman military medicine, which few people know about. Archaeologists who first found perfectly preserved Roman surgical instrument sets and excavations could not believe their eyes at first. The instruments regularly used by Roman military medics almost 2,000 years ago in the field were strikingly and incredibly similar to modern surgical instruments in terms of shape, function, and even operating principles. The technological gap turned out to be much smaller than historians had assumed, forcing them to revise their ideas about the level of ancient medicine. It was not just a primitive set of a rough knife and a heavy saw for amputations, as one might naively assume. It was a carefully selected, highly specialized arsenal of dozens of different instruments, each of which had its own precise, strictly defined purpose for specific medical procedures. Roman military surgeons had sophisticated devices for safely performing the most complex surgical procedures, requiring the highest precision and skill. The variety of instruments allowed them to perform operations of any complexity, from simple arrow removal to trepanation of the skull. The basis of any surgical kit was numerous scalpels of various specialized shapes, sizes, and purposes for different types of incisions. They were skillfully made from high-quality hardened steel or durable bronze by experienced master armorers, and the blades were sharpened to incredible sharpness, capable of cutting through tissue with almost no effort. There were scalpels with long, straight blades for extended incisions of skin and muscle, and with curved, crescent-shaped blades for delicate work in hard-to-reach areas of the body or when working on deep wounds. Each blade shape was optimized for a specific type of surgical procedure, demonstrating a deep understanding of anatomy. Special metal clamps and various forceps of different sizes and designs were widely used to effectively stop dangerous bleeding during operations. They allowed the surgeon to reliably clamp the damaged blood vessel with high precision without damaging the surrounding healthy tissue. This vital hemostasis technique saved countless lives of Roman legionnaires by effectively preventing massive, life-threatening blood loss on the operating table. Without bleeding control, most serious operations would have been impossible and would have resulted in the death of the patient. The rich arsenal of an experienced military surgeon necessarily included specialized bone instruments for working with fractures. Special powerful metal levers of various lengths were actively used for the careful reduction of painful joint dislocations and the precise repositioning of bone fragments in complex fractures into the correct position. For delicate work with the bones of the skull in cases of traumatic brain injury, there were even special traphenes, complex instruments with sharp teeth for controlled drilling of round holes in the skull bone, which allowed intracranial pressure to be reduced. Skull trepanation was one of the most difficult and risky operations, requiring exceptional skill and a steady hand. The thin probes and bone elevators of various shapes in the Roman set deserve special mention and admiration. These were elegant, thin metal instruments of various lengths and tip shapes, specially designed for careful examination of deep wounds and body cavities. With their indispensable help, an experienced surgeon could accurately determine the true depth of a dangerous wound, assess damage to internal organs, and find stuck foreign bodies, such as bronze arrowheads or sharp bone fragments, that needed to be removed. Probes allowed surgeons to see the internal condition of the wound without additional incisions, minimizing the trauma of the intervention. The inventive Romans even created a special instrument, remarkably similar to a modern medical syringe in its principle of operation and purpose. It was actively used to thoroughly wash contaminated wounds with clean water or antiseptic solutions, as well as to inject concentrated medicinal solutions directly into the tissue. This revolutionary device made it possible to effectively clean damaged, inflamed tissue of dirt and pus and deliver healing medicines directly to the source of the problem or infection, bypassing the digestive system. Local administration of drugs was much more effective than oral administration, as the concentration of active substances in the right place was higher. Many complex instruments were ingeniously designed to be collapsible or easily disassembled for convenient storage and transportation. This made them compact and extremely convenient for rapid transport in field military conditions, along with the Legion on campaign. The outstanding quality of the metal, the precision of the machining, and the perfection of the workmanship of these medical items continue to amaze modern specialists to this day. Some of the instruments found look as if they were made recently, not 2,000 years ago, which testifies to the highest level of metalworking. All precious instruments were carefully stored in special protective cases with compartments, often skillfully made of sturdy wood or durable bronze with clasps. Before each use for surgery, they were boiled in clean water or thoroughly treated with concentrated vinegar for disinfection. Experienced Romans empirically understood the critical importance of cleanliness and sterility of instruments for the successful prevention of post-operative complications and infections, although they did not know about the existence of microbes. This practice of sterilization was forgotten in the Middle Ages and rediscovered only in the 19th century, costing millions of lives. The availability of such an impressive arsenal of specialized instruments allowed skilled Roman military surgeons to successfully perform the most complex operations, which in medieval Europe were simply not attempted again until the Renaissance, 1500 years later. They were not just primitive self-taught bone setters, but highly skilled masters of their dangerous craft, possessing systematic knowledge. Their daily work of saving lives was not a simple craft passed down from generation to generation, but a true medical science based on the accumulated experience of thousands of operations and systematic observations of treatment outcomes. What you are about to learn is prohibited in most countries around the world, but for the Romans it was a lifesaver. Performing complex operations would have been impossible without solving the main problem: unbearable pain. Roman physicians developed a whole arsenal of means to control it, creating the prototype of modern anesthesia. They did not have modern chemical drugs, but they skillfully used what nature provided. Their knowledge of pharmacology was extensive and based on the works of Greek physicians, such as Dioscorides. The main tools in their fight against pain were opium poppy, mandrake, and henbane. They obtained opium from the juice of unripe opium poppy capsules. It was the most powerful painkiller in the ancient world. It was used both in the form of tinctures and in the form of balls for oral administration. Mandrake root was known for its soporific properties. Its tincture, mixed with wine, plunged the patient into a deep sleep, close to a state of anesthesia. This allowed the surgeon to work calmly, without fear of sudden movements by the patient. Belladonna was also used as a strong sedative and painkiller. However, its use required great caution, as an overdose could be fatal. Roman doctors knew the exact proportions and recipes. One of the most common methods was the use of so-called sleeping sponges. A sea sponge was soaked in a mixture of opium, mandrake, and other plant juices, and then dried. Before the operation, the sponge was moistened with water and held to the patient's nose, allowing them to inhale the vapors. These methods were, of course, not as reliable as modern anesthesia. The depth of sleep and the degree of pain relief could vary. However, it was incomparably better than performing surgery on a living person without any assistance. Roman doctors also practiced local anesthesia. For example, they used cooling by applying bags of snow or ice water to the surgical site. This reduced the sensitivity of the nerve endings. Understanding the need for pain control was another revolutionary step in Roman medicine. They realized that pain shock could be as dangerous as the injury itself. By reducing the patient's suffering, they increased their chances of survival. But managing pain during surgery is only half the battle. How did the Romans fight the invisible enemy that threatened the patient after a successful operation? In the next chapter, you will learn about their methods of antiseptics. The Romans did not know about the existence of microbes, but their practical observations led to the creation of a system that worked as if they did. They saw a direct link between cleanliness and successful wound healing. This pragmatic approach to hygiene was their main weapon against post-operative complications. Clean water was the basis of everything. As already mentioned, valetudinaria were always located near sources of running water. Before any procedure, both the doctor and the patient had to thoroughly wash their hands and the area around the wound. One of the main antiseptics was wine vinegar. Its acidic environment suppressed the growth of bacteria, although the Romans did not understand the mechanism of this process. Diluted vinegar was used to wash wounds, cleaning them of dirt and foreign particles. Boiling was also widely used to treat wounds and instruments. Before surgery, instruments were immersed in boiling water, which by modern standards is a method of sterilization. This simple action dramatically reduced the risk of infection. Roman doctors were skilled in making bandages. They used clean linen cloths that had been soaked in wine or vinegar. Such bandages not only protected the wound, but also created an unfavorable environment for microorganisms. Materials with known antiseptic properties were also used as dressing materials. For example, spider webs, which contain lysozyme, or certain types of moss, which have absorbent and bactericidal qualities. They were masters at using natural resources. Doctors paid attention to the condition of the wound after surgery. They distinguished between different types of healing. If the wound remained clean and dry, it was considered a good sign. The Romans practiced wound drainage. If fluid accumulated in the cavity, they inserted hollow tubes made of bronze or fabric to ensure drainage. This prevented the development of serious complications. Waste disposal was also an important aspect of hygiene. All used dressings and biological tissues were immediately removed from operating rooms and wards and destroyed. This maintained the highest level of cleanliness in the hospital. This comprehensive approach, clean water, antiseptic solutions, sterilization of instruments, and clean bandages, created a barrier against invisible enemies. That is why survival rates in Roman valetudinaria were phenomenally high for their time. They intuitively discovered the principles of asepsis and antisepsis 1,700 years before Lister and Pasteur. Ready for the shocking truth about Roman surgery? Roman doctors didn't just treat wounds. They mastered techniques that are still the basis of surgical practice today. Their goal was not just to save lives, but to restore the function of the damaged body part as much as possible. One of the most common procedures was suturing wounds. Bronze or bone needles and linen, or even horsehair threads were used for this purpose. Surgeons were skilled at applying neat sutures that promoted rapid and clean healing with minimal scarring. To join the edges of large wounds, they also used metal staples or clamps, similar to modern ones. This method allowed them to securely fasten the tissues and speed up the healing process. This was especially important for extensive injuries. Roman doctors were masters at removing foreign bodies. Using special probes and forceps, they could retrieve arrowheads, darts, and stone fragments from deep within wounds. One of the most famous finds is the so-called Diocles scoop, a special tool for safely removing arrows. They understood the importance of stopping bleeding not only during, but also before surgery. The Romans actively used tourniquets. A tight bandage applied above the wound significantly reduced fluid loss and gave the surgeon time to work calmly. In cases of severe limb damage, when it was impossible to save them, doctors resorted to amputation. This operation required the highest level of skill. It was performed very quickly using special bone saws, and the vessels were immediately cauterized with red-hot iron to stop the bleeding. Cauterization was a common method. It not only stopped the bleeding, but also disinfected the wound. This method was painful, but often the only way to save a life. The Romans also practiced treating fractures. They knew how to align bone fragments and apply immobilizing bandages soaked in plaster or starch paste. These bandages were the prototype of modern plaster casts. Post-operative care was no less important than the operation itself. Doctors regularly examined wounds, changed dressings, and monitored the patient's general condition. They understood that healing was a long process that required constant monitoring. All these techniques, honed on thousands of wounded legionnaires, turned Roman military medicine into a true science. But treating physical injuries was only part of their job. How did they ensure a soldier's full recovery? In the next chapter, we will talk about diet and rehabilitation. For Roman doctors, surgery was only the beginning of the road to recovery. They understood perfectly well that a weakened body needed not only rest, but also proper nutrition to recover. Therefore, there was a whole system of therapeutic dietetics in the valetudinaria. Hospital kitchens did not prepare standard soldiers' food. Under the guidance of doctors, cooks created a special menu for convalescence. It was aimed at strengthening the body and accelerating tissue regeneration. The diet was based on easily digestible and nutritious foods. These included chicken broth, porridge, eggs, cottage cheese, and honey. Such food did not burden the digestive system, but provided the body with the necessary energy. Great attention was paid to vitamins. Although the term did not exist at the time, fresh vegetables, fruits, and herbs were always included in the diet. The Romans knew that certain foods, such as cabbage, promoted healing and prevented scurvy. The diet could be tailored individually for each patient, depending on their condition and type of injury. Doctors gave cooks precise instructions on what to prepare for each soldier and how to prepare it. It was a personalized approach to treatment. In addition to diet, rehabilitation played an important role. Once the wound began to heal, soldiers were not left simply lying down. Doctors developed exercise programs for them to restore mobility and muscle strength. The courtyards of valetudinaria often had special areas equipped for therapeutic physical training. Under the supervision of medical staff, patients performed exercises, gradually increasing the load. The goal was not just to cure the soldier, but to fully return him to duty. Psychological rehabilitation was also part of the process. Staying in the clean, quiet, and organized space of the hospital had a calming effect in itself. Communicating with fellow patients and the care of the staff helped to cope with psychological trauma. Doctors monitored the progress of each patient. They kept records, noting the dynamics of healing and recovery of functions. Soldiers were discharged only when they were fully ready to return to service. This comprehensive approach, surgery, hygiene, diet, and rehabilitation, was unique for its time. It showed how highly the Roman state valued its soldiers. Each legionnaire was not just a cog in the military machine, but a valuable asset worth investing resources in. Roman military medicine did not suddenly appear out of nowhere, as one might think. Its solid theoretical basis and foundation were the extensive medical knowledge methodically accumulated by the outstanding Greek civilization over centuries of observation and experimentation. The Romans, being naturally gifted practitioners and organizers rather than theorists, wisely took the best and most proven aspects of the rich Greek medical science and systematically transformed this abstract knowledge into a real effective system of mass healthcare. They did not reinvent medicine, but wisely adapted existing knowledge for the practical needs of their huge army and state. The great Greek physicians of antiquity, such as the legendary Hippocrates of Kos, who lived in the 5th century BC, laid the unshakable foundations of rational, scientific medicine based on observation and logic. They were the first to revolutionarily begin systematically searching for natural material causes of various diseases and ailments, resolutely rejecting primitive mystical explanations involving the wrath of the gods or evil spirits. Their fundamental works on the anatomy of the human body, methods of diagnosing diseases, and medical ethics became a solid foundation and starting point for all subsequent generations of doctors for centuries to come. The Hippocratic Oath remains the basis of medical ethics to this day, which speaks to its enduring value and wisdom. The outstanding Galen of Pergamon, a brilliant Greek physician and researcher who lived in the 2nd century AD during the heyday of the empire, had an enormous and decisive influence on the development of Roman medical practice. He served for a long time as a personal physician at the imperial court in Rome and previously worked at a gladiator school where he gained unique experience in treating serious combat injuries. His numerous, detailed works on human anatomy and physiology became an indisputable authority in the main textbook for doctors for many centuries to come, right up to the Renaissance. Galen performed numerous animal autopsies and systematized knowledge about organ functions, although some of his conclusions proved to be erroneous due to the ban on human autopsies. Another key, indispensable figure in the development of Roman medicine was Pedanius Dioscorides, an experienced military doctor in the Roman army of Emperor Nero in the 1st century. As part of the legions, he traveled throughout the vast empire from one end to the other, carefully studying various plants and their healing properties in different climatic zones. His monumental 5-volume work on medicinal substances became the first systematic scientific pharmacopoeia in human history, describing in detail more than 600 types of medicinal plants with instructions for their use. This work remained the main reference book on pharmacology for more than 1,500 years and was translated into many languages. The educated Romans actively translated these valuable Greek medical texts into Latin and studied them carefully, making them available to their doctors. However, their main historical genius and unique contribution lay not in the development of abstract theory or philosophical reasoning, but in the practical application of knowledge and the brilliant organization of the medical system. They methodically took this scattered theoretical knowledge of the Greeks and put it to work for the Roman state on an unprecedented scale throughout the empire. The Romans transformed medicine from an elite art practiced by individual physicians into a mass state healthcare system. While the ancient Greeks were brilliant medical theorists and outstanding individual practitioners who treated wealthy patients, the practical Romans became ingenious organizers of mass healthcare at the state level. They were the first in history to create a coherent system of medical education with training programs, build specialized military hospitals with operating rooms, and public hospitals for poor citizens. They revolutionarily made quality medical care available not only to the wealthy elite of society, but also to ordinary soldiers and even slaves. This was an unprecedented breakthrough in the social policy of the ancient world. The Roman army naturally became an ideal testing ground and training ground for the constant honing of doctors' practical medical skills. The constant, uninterrupted flow of patients with various combat injuries and wounds gave military doctors truly invaluable practical experience that could not be obtained in peacetime. Nowhere else in the ancient world was it possible to accumulate such extensive, systematic knowledge in the specific field of traumatology and field surgery as quickly and effectively as in the active army. Each battle brought new cases for studying and improving methods of treating various types of wounds. Military medics from different legions constantly exchanged valuable experience and observations through official channels and personal connections. Unique knowledge and treatment methods acquired in one legion on the distant border with wild Germania could be very quickly applied and adapted in another legion stationed in hot Syria on the eastern border. This created a unified medical space and information network throughout the empire, facilitating the rapid spread of best practices and innovations between provinces. Successful treatment methods became the standard for the entire army, which increased the overall effectiveness of the medical system. Thus, Roman military medicine is a truly unique historical synthesis of the knowledge and approaches of two great civilizations. It harmoniously combined deep Greek scientific thought and theoretical foundations with characteristic Roman pragmatism, outstanding organizational talent, and famous engineering genius in construction. It was this powerful fusion of different traditions that gave rise to a revolutionary medical system of unprecedented scale, which effectively saved thousands of Roman legionnaires' lives on countless bloody battlefields throughout the known world. Effective military medicine was not just a humanitarian achievement. It became a powerful tool that increased the combat effectiveness of the Roman army. Its influence extended far beyond the walls of hospitals. It was a true force multiplier. The most obvious result was a reduction in irretrievable losses. Soldiers who would have been doomed in any other army returned to duty in the Roman army. This allowed the legions to maintain their numbers even after heavy fighting. Even more important was the preservation of experienced personnel. A veteran who had been through many battles possessed invaluable combat experience. The loss of such a soldier was much more significant than the loss of a recruit. The medical system that returned veterans to the ranks essentially preserved the institutional memory of the legion. Experience was not lost irretrievably, but accumulated, making the unit only stronger. This gave the Romans a qualitative advantage over their enemies. As already mentioned, the availability of guaranteed medical care had a huge impact on morale. Soldiers felt cared for by the state. This strengthened their loyalty and willingness to follow orders. Good medical care also helped in recruiting new soldiers. The prospect of receiving free, high-quality medical care throughout their service was a compelling argument for many young men joining the army. In civilian life, such care was available only to the very wealthy. The valetudinarium system also served a preventive function. Doctors monitored the sanitary conditions of the camp and the quality of water and food. This prevented outbreaks of epidemics, which in ancient armies could claim more lives than battles. A healthy soldier is an effective soldier. Preventing disease and maintaining the overall health of the legion was as much a task for medics as treating wounds. This allowed the army to be kept in constant combat readiness. The economic effect was also significant. Training and equipping a single legionnaire cost the state a lot of money. Treating a soldier was much cheaper than training and arming a new one. Thus, investments in military medicine paid off many times over. They increased survivability, preserved experience, strengthened morale, and prevented disease. The Romans were the first to understand that caring for soldiers was not an expense, but an investment in victory. The Roman military medical system was the pinnacle of achievement in the ancient world. It established standards of organization, hygiene, and surgical practice that were unsurpassed for the next 1,500 years. However, with the fall of the Western Roman Empire, this great legacy was largely lost. With the collapse of the centralized state and its army, the structure that supported the medical system also disappeared. Professional military doctors, hospitals, standardized training, all of this became a thing of the past. For many centuries, medicine in Europe reverted to individual practice, often mixed with superstition. The knowledge accumulated by Roman doctors was only partially preserved, mainly in monastery libraries and in Byzantium. Surgery as a science fell into decline. Complex operations, which were routine for Roman doctors, came to be considered impossible. Sanitary conditions in medieval armies and cities were appalling. The principles of hygiene that had been the norm in Roman military camps were completely forgotten. Epidemics mowed down soldiers and civilians with terrifying regularity. It was not until the Renaissance that European scientists began to rediscover the works of Galen and other ancient authors. A slow revival of anatomy and surgery began. However, a systematic approach similar to that of the Romans was still a long way off. Ironically, until the 18th and even 19th centuries, many European armies did not have such an organized and effective medical service as Trajan's legions. Soldiers were once again left to fend for themselves, and hospitals were hotbeds of infection. It was only with the development of science in the modern era, with the discoveries of Pasteur and Lister, that medicine was able to return to the level of understanding of hygiene that the Romans had achieved intuitively. Only then did the creation of modern military medical services begin. Studying Roman medicine, we see how fragile knowledge can be. An entire system ahead of its time can be forgotten for millennia. The Romans created an almost modern model of military medicine, but the world was not ready to preserve it. Nevertheless, their legacy did not disappear without a trace. The idea that the state is responsible for the health of its soldiers, that organized assistance is more effective than chaotic assistance, that cleanliness saves lives, all these principles, laid down by Rome, form the basis of modern military medicine. They did not invent the scalpel, but they invented a system that enabled it to save lives on an industrial scale. We have seen that Roman military medicine was not just a set of practices, but a comprehensive, well-thought-out, and incredibly progressive system. From an organized medical corps and specialized hospitals to sophisticated instruments and concepts of hygiene, every element of this system was aimed at one goal: to preserve the life of the empire's most valuable resource, the Roman soldier. It was a quiet revolution that changed not only the history of medicine, but also the history of warfare. This example from the past shows that the true strength of an army lies not only in its ability to destroy, but also in its ability to preserve. The Romans understood this 2,000 years ago, creating a legacy that we still draw on today. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. What other hidden aspects of ancient civilizations interest you? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our new research.